This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt Podcast. I'm running a promotion from now until the end of February. If you enjoy the show, write a positive review on Apple Podcasts or even on any of the other apps that have a review system. Take a screenshot, email it along with your name and address to admin@beyondcontemptpodcast.com, and I'll send you a podcast sticker. Thanks again for your support. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. Milwaukee is the largest city in the state of Wisconsin, with a population just over 2 million. It's home to the Brew Crew, the Harley-Davidson headquarters, Miller and Pabst breweries, and one of the world's largest music festivals called Summerfest. In the 1980s, it was also the backdrop to one of the most sensationalized murder cases that the Midwest had ever seen. There were accusations of police corruption, concealing evidence, and ethics violations. There was even a prison escape that divided the public on the guilt or innocence of the accused. You're listening to Episode 18, Lawrencia Bambi Bembenek. Lawrencia Ann Bembenek was born on August 15, 1958, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to parents Joseph and Virginia Bembenek. Lawrencia went by the name Laurie when she was younger. She was from the South Side and grew up in a suburb of Bayview. Joseph had worked for the Milwaukee Police and witnessed misconduct within the department. The corruption wasn't just a few cops, it was systemic. So Joseph quit his job only after a few years on the force and became a carpenter. Laurie had been an unplanned surprise for her parents. Therefore, there was a large age gap between her and her two older sisters. Colette was 13 years older and Melanie was 10 years older. Laurie said her childhood was lonely because she only had one friend, but she found happiness within it too. Bembenek was drawn to solo activities like reading and drawing. She attended a Catholic elementary school in Bayview called St. Augustine. A priest had taken an inappropriate interest in the bodies of Laurie and some of her classmates. The priest even lost his temper and called Laurie a slut. At her young age, she didn't even understand what that word meant. Laurie's parents wanted to remove her from that school. However, Laurie wanted to stay because if she left, she'd be admitting that she had done something wrong, and she hadn't. Shortly after the incident, the Bembeneks pulled their daughter from that school and enrolled her at St. Mary's Academy, a private all-girls Catholic school. Laurie convinced her parents that they were wasting their money on private school because she was too rebellious and lacked the desire to be in a strict environment. In 1976, she attended Bayview High, which was a public school. She played the flute in the school band and ran the 110-yard hurdles and track. During her senior year, Laurie worked part-time while she finished the last of her classes. Laurie worked as a waitress, she worked at a jewelry store, and also worked in the shoe section of the now-defunct Kmart department store. The summer she graduated high school was one of Laurie's most memorable. She went to Daytona Beach, Florida with her best friend. It was the first time Laurie had been allowed to take a vacation without her family. While in Daytona, Laurie met a boy named Danny and ended up dating him for 4 years. Later that summer, Laurie received a scholarship to attend Bryant and Stratton College after she took a test and won the scholarship. BSC was a private college with campuses in New York, Ohio, Virginia, and Wisconsin. She received her associate's degree in fashion merchandising management. During college, she worked 3 part-time jobs. Laurie was a bartender, she was a cashier at a local pharmacy, and she stocked shelves at Carter's, which was a company that sold baby clothes. After college, she worked for a short time at the now bankrupt clothing store, The Limited. In 1978, Laurie worked as an associate who managed displays in the Boston store. Since high school, She had always worked 2 or 3 jobs at a time to make ends meet. Laurie was getting bored with the retail fashion industry and was thinking about changing careers. She considered being a police officer, given that her dad had worked as one when she was a kid. It was a good career with solid benefits, and she thought of that as an option to pursue. At age 21, Laurie applied to the Milwaukee Police Department. After going through the physical and written exams, they accepted Laurie into the Milwaukee Police Academy. It wasn't long before she noticed how differently the males and the females were treated. It was like the good old boys club, but Laurie held her ground. When fellow cops used words like policeman, Laurie would correct their language and ask them to say police officer instead. She was eager to help change the sexist attitudes in her work environment that existed deep within Milwaukee's law enforcement. Laurie was given an academy start date of March 10, 1980, and it annoyed her boyfriend Danny that she was starting a new job right as they were about to take a vacation together. Their relationship had already been in trouble, and this was the last straw for Danny. He found a replacement for Laurie and took someone else on vacation with him. The two took a relationship break, which was inevitable. Danny wanted a stay-at-home wife who took care of the kids. Laurie wanted independence, a career, and didn't want children. She still had a few weeks before the police academy start date and still wanted to take a vacation. Judy Zeiss was a fellow academy recruit that Laurie met during their entrance exam. The two became friends and vacationed in Miami before the start of their new job. In March 1980, the academy was grueling, both physically and mentally. Laurie was a competitive woman and enjoyed the close relationships that developed in her group of recruits. She was given the nickname Bambi by one of the fledgling officers in her class. Laurie continued to battle her way through training and fought the injustices experienced by female police officers. The male instructors were especially tough on the female recruits. The men often spoke crudely to the women. "Well, what do we have here? A pussy cop?" Or, "Hey, why are you carrying around that nightstick? Can't you find a man?" Laurie was conspicuous because she would stand up for herself. In one exchange, a detective saw Laurie laughing and got in her face to shut it down. He said, "Bembenek, is your mother still hooking?" And Laurie responded, "Just on the weekend, sir." In late April 1980, Laurie attended a housewarming party that was being held at a fellow recruit's place. She took a male friend named Timothy with her, who didn't know any of Laurie's co-workers, but was fine tagging along. The party was hot and crowded, and Tim was bored. The pair left the party, and on the way out they stopped to wait in the restroom line. A fellow officer's wife approached Laurie and said she didn't appreciate that her husband was staring at Laurie when she walked into the party. She told Laurie to stick that badge of hers up her ass. Timothy attempted to defuse the situation and suggested they immediately leave. Laurie always felt the need to fight injustice, and on the way out the door, Laurie told the woman that she had done nothing wrong. A few weeks later, in May 1980, Laurie attended a concert with Judy Zeiss and some of her friends. Police arrested Judy and her friend Jan that night because Jan had marijuana in her possession. Judy was fired from the department because there was a small joint in a cup under her seat at the concert. This situation impacted Laurie's professional life. The police department questioned Laurie over the next several weeks, and it officially became part of an internal investigation. Apparently, an anonymous person claimed Laurie had been smoking marijuana at the housewarming party, and they reported her to the police. She suspected that the cop's wife from the party made the allegation. As the investigation continued, Laurie had to endure sexist behavior more frequently, but still graduated from the police academy and began her first assignment on the south side of town in the 2nd District. Now it was Laurie's turn to witness the corruption and immorality within the Milwaukee Police Department. She witnessed dishonesty, laziness, and brutality. Laurie had a strong moral compass, and this is not what she expected. An officer named Susie told Laurie that her friend Judy Zeiss was bad news and not someone she should hang out with. Laurie didn't know how to take that information, so she set it aside. At the end of August 1980, Laurie celebrated her 22nd birthday. She called her district station to confirm her upcoming work schedule. Laurie was shocked with the news that she received. While on the phone, the captain told her that the chief of police fired her. The next day, an officer came to Laurie's house and took her badge and service weapon. The official reason for her dismissal was unfaithfulness and filing a false report. The irony was that Laurie had been fired based on rumors that weren't true, but many police officers violated departmental rules regularly. Officers would park their squad cars in the cemetery after bar time, where they would either sleep off the alcohol or continue the party. Some officers would get free drinks from bars on their patrol route. Other cops sold black market pornographic videos out of the back of their cars. They used excessive force on suspects who were already handcuffed. Officers used and sold drugs while on duty. Drunk drivers were released when cops didn't want to do the paperwork. Some officers cheated on their wives, and some men utilized sex workers. In September 1980, Laurie began babysitting every night for her ex-coworker Susie's daughter. She needed to keep some income rolling in, while her union attorneys attempted to get her job back. At the end of September, the union lawyers scored a win, and the police chief agreed to release Laurie's dismissal files to her. She was in disbelief when she read that her friend, Judy Zeiss, had implicated her when Judy had been arrested for marijuana possession at the concert. Laurie was infuriated and confronted Judy about the false statement. Judy was apologetic, but told Laurie that she felt like she didn't have a choice. The police who questioned her backed her into a corner and were only interested in Judy telling them what they wanted to hear. They stood over her and told her exactly what to write into her statement. Laurie was upset, but forgave her friend. In mid-October, Laurie was informed that the police union dropped her reinstatement case. Later on, police dropped the marijuana possession charge against Judy, and if she was innocent, Laurie was too. But Laurie had no interest in trying to be a cop anymore. The whole incident had crushed her self-worth. After losing their jobs, Judy and Laurie lacked financial stability and were barely scraping by. Judy concocted a scam and called all the men she had been sleeping with. She told them that she needed money for an abortion and collected $800 in total from 4 men. Laurie attempted to move on from her dismissal from the police department and landed a waitressing job at Hugh Hefner's Lake Geneva Playboy Club. While the Playboy Bunnies were a popular attraction, the resort had all kinds of entertainment, including a golf course designed by Jack the Golden Bear Nicholas and A-list performers like Tony Bennett, Liza Minnelli, and Sonny and Cher. This job would later become a controversial detail in Laurie's life, although she only worked there for 3 weeks. She never officially worked as a Playboy bunny and never posed nude for anyone. The most edgy thing that Laurie had ever done was pose for a Schlitz Brewing Company calendar in a low-cut dress. In November 1980, Laurie met a man named Alfred Fred Schultz while she was at her friend Susie's house. Fred was a veteran detective on the Milwaukee Police Force who was outgoing and enjoyed being the center of attention. He was sleeping with so many female officers that he often scrambled their names. Laurie and Fred's relationship moved rapidly, and the pair became friends, transitioned into couplehood, and were married in a quiet ceremony in January 1981. Laurie was an independent woman with feminist instincts and decided not to take Fred's last name, which was a bold move in the 1980s. Laurie was pleased that Fred had already had a vasectomy because she wasn't interested in having kids. Fred had not even been divorced for 6 months before he married Laurie, which is technically not permitted by Wisconsin law. He admitted that he felt forced into marrying his ex-wife because he got her pregnant. Fred was still bitter about the situation because his old roommate was sleeping with his ex-wife and living at his house, which he was still paying for. Newlyweds, Fred and Laurie, rented an apartment with Judy Zeiss to keep living costs low. When Judy moved out after she got into a serious relationship with a man named Tom, money was tight for Fred and Laurie. Laurie wasn't making much as a personal trainer and a private security guard, and Fred made substantial support payments to his ex-wife. Judy never formally announced that she was moving out. She just started moving her stuff out when Fred and Laurie were out of state. It eventually surfaced that in 1975, Fred had killed Tom's best friend, who was an off-duty cop. This put a major rift in Judy and Laurie's relationship. Laurie felt like she was in a downward spiral. But her life really got flipped on its head when Fred's ex-wife was found murdered. Christine Schultz was born on November 11, 1950, and was Fred's ex-wife. They had 2 sons together, Sean, age 11, and Shannon, age 7. Christine was murdered on May 28, 1981, at age 31, and had only been divorced from Fred for a few months. Christine and the boys were living in their Milwaukee home at the time of her death. Sean phoned a family friend after finding his mother's dead body at 2:15 a.m. She was face down in the bed, gagged and bound in a pool of blood with a .38 caliber bullet that entered her back and penetrated her heart. Her son Sean had seen the killer when the man attacked him. He said the killer had a long reddish-colored ponytail and was wearing a green army jacket with black shoes. Christine's ex-husband Fred was one of the officers who was dispatched to the crime scene. Fred and his partner were having drinks at a local bar while on duty. They raced over to Christine's as quickly as possible after they received the call. Fred took his sons to a neighbor's house while the investigation of the crime scene began. When he called his wife Laurie, he got a busy signal, which was unusual because Laurie was usually sleeping at that early of a time in the morning. Fred waited a few minutes and tried to call his wife again. This time Laurie picked up the phone and she said she'd been sleeping. Fred told her about Christine's murder, and Laurie felt like she was in a dream. After Laurie got off the phone with him, she took a swig from a whiskey bottle that was sitting out and worried about becoming the primary caretaker for Fred's 2 boys. Fred arrived home at 6 in the morning, and Laurie had already been interviewed by detectives. In Laurie's opinion, the interrogation she endured was unprofessional and inappropriate. She told the officers that she had been home and sleeping at the time of the murder. They didn't examine any of the guns in the home or perform the gunpowder residue testing on Laurie's hands. Only after 3 weeks had passed did investigators return to take Fred's off-duty service pistol. Testing determined that Fred's off-duty gun was used to kill Christine. Fred had an alibi because he had been working, but Laurie had nothing because she was sleeping. Laurie was arrested on July 24, 1981, and was charged with the murder of Christine Schultz. Laurie fit perfectly into society's definition of beautiful, with her blonde hair and blue eyes, plus she was tall and thin. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that her trial garnered a tremendous amount of public attention and turned into a frenzied media circus. She was often salaciously referred to as Lawrencia and Bembenek, former Playboy bunny model. The intruder who killed Christine didn't force their way into her house. Prosecutors claim that Laurie was the only person, other than Fred, who could have been able to get into Christine's home without breaking in. Fred made secret copies of Christine's house keys from one of his son's keys. Laurie wasn't even aware of this until after the murder. On the stand, Sean Schultz proclaimed that even if Laurie was wearing football pads, she could not have been the killer because this person was substantially larger than her. Christine's sons gave several testimonies about what the intruder was wearing. They agreed on one thing. The person had long reddish-brown hair and a ponytail. While Laurie had blonde hair, police found a wig with reddish-brown hair underneath Laurie's apartment. It appeared that someone flushed the wig down the toilet, and it traveled through the building's pipes until it clogged in a drain. During the trial, a witness testified that Judy Zeiss had knocked on her door one day and asked to use her bathroom. After she left, the plumbing was clogged. Judy admitted that she owned a wig that matched the color of the one in question. Judy testified that she overheard Laurie talk about money troubles and how it would pay to have Christine blown away. Judy Zeiss tanked her ex-best friend while on the stand. Laurie felt betrayed, and would later find out that police pressured Judy to take her statements out of context, and in exchange, they would help her husband, who was facing federal drug charges. Fred was paying child support and was helping Christine with the mortgage. Prosecutors claimed that this angered Laurie, since the couple were experiencing financial troubles. And the almost $800 per month that Fred paid to Christine was a substantial sum of money. Besides the wig, and the alleged outbursts about finances from Laurie, It was Fred's gun that was used in the murder. The prosecution didn't think Laurie intended to kill her, but had gone to Christine's to convince her to sell her home and move. They believe Laurie used the gun as a prop to scare Christine. When Christine refused to listen and told Laurie to leave, Laurie shot her dead and attempted to strangle the boys. The prosecution said that Laurie had the ability, motive, and opportunity to kill Christine. Laurie's defense attorney, Donald Eisenberg, tried his best to convince the jury that the prosecution's story was false. He argued that the police had planted evidence to point the finger at Laurie, and much of that evidence was circumstantial. The defense attorney said the gun evidence was meaningless because Laurie would not have used a weapon that could easily be traced back to her. Her attorney took the angle that this was a police cover-up and conspiracy against Laurie. Laurie testified at her trial, and the public felt like it hurt her case. On the stand, she was dressed modestly, to combat the former Playboy bunny model moniker that the public had attached to her persona. But during her testimony, people thought she seemed unemotional and void of any sadness towards Christine's murder. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Laurie guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison on March 9, 1982. They sent her to Chichita Correctional Institute in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Just 5 months after her conviction, Fred sent a final letter to Laurie in prison that read, "Dear Lawrencia, goodbye. Good luck. Fred." Laurie and Fred were officially divorced a few years later. After reading her Dear John letter, Fred also turned on her and told the media that Laurie was exactly where she belonged, in jail. Laurie believed that Fred had set her up, hired someone to kill Christine, and pinned the murder on her. She suspected Fred hired career criminal Freddie Horenberger. They met while they worked on a remodeling project together, and Horenberger was also a former boyfriend of Judy Zeiss. A Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department police officer questioned Horenberger and an accomplice a few days before Christine's murder. A few weeks later, Horenberger had beaten and robbed Judy Zeiss. Police eventually caught and convicted him, and he served 10 years in prison. After his release, he committed another armed robbery. Then Horenberger shot himself in the head. He denied killing Christine Schultz, but Laurie's defense team thought it would only be a matter of time before they would link him to the murder. She also believed that she was framed because she had a sexual discrimination suit against the Milwaukee Police Department after her dismissal. She included photos from the annual police picnic where officers posed nude, smoked marijuana, and partied with known drug dealers. Fred Schultz was part of that group. Laurie earned her bachelor's degree while in prison from the University of Wisconsin Parkside, and she helped create a prisoner's newspaper. Laurie filed several appeals of her conviction, but they were all unsuccessful. She was convinced that even though she had a parole hearing coming up in 1993, that parole never would be granted. The women's prison at Chichita was antiquated and had no running water in the cells. Laurie said that it was depressing. During this time, she met a factory worker named Dominic Gugliato, who was Laurie's cellmate's brother. Dominic and Laurie fell in love, and he even proposed to her while she was in prison. After much deliberation, they concocted an elaborate escape plan. On July 15, 1990, Laurie escaped from prison through a laundry room window. It helped that the prison guards were preoccupied with conducting an inspection, and the laundry room window had not been properly secured. She jumped out of the window and ran into the woods. Laurie scaled a 10-foot fence that was topped with razor wire. She had several large gashes on her legs, but cleared the fence. Dominic picked her up, and they sped off in his truck. 2 days after she escaped, they were spotted in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. They abandoned Dominic's truck in the parking lot of Target and fled to the forests. Dominic was known to be an avid hunter and fisherman, which made escape to the woods possible. The public could not get enough of Laurie Bembenek's prison escape story, and stores sold t-shirts, bumper stickers, and cardboard cutouts, which played off her nickname and said, "Run, Bambi, run." A nightclub ran a Bambi look-alike contest, and a restaurant named one of their burgers after her. Dominic and Laurie purportedly didn't have much money with them, but the DA suspected that their financial situation had been underestimated. Laurie had many male visitors while in prison, and they might have supplied her with money. Fred was living in Florida when Bembenek and Laurie escaped. He created a new life for himself there that included a new wife and running a construction company. Fred installed a surveillance system in his home because he claimed that he was afraid of what they might do to him. When they officially crossed the line into Canada, they told the border officer that they were on their honeymoon. The couple went by the names of Jennifer and Anthony Gazzana, and they said they were from Chicago. Laurie secured work as a personal trainer and waitress at Thunder Bay's Columbia Grill and Tavern. There were even police officers who were regulars at that diner. Everything was working out until America's Most Wanted aired Laurie's story in the United States and Canada. Someone recognized her, and 5 days later, a detective showed up at Columbia Grill and Tavern to check her paperwork on October 17, 1990. After the detective left the restaurant, she went back to their apartment. Bembenek and Laurie packed up their stuff and prepared to flee again, but police found and arrested them. Bembenek was immediately deported to the United States and was convicted in September 1991 of aiding and abetting escape from lawful custody. He stopped all contact with Laurie 2 months after his conviction. Laurie attempted to seek refugee status in Canada, but was unsuccessful. Before turning her over to Wisconsin authorities, the Canadian government helped Laurie when they received assurances that Milwaukee officials would conduct a judicial review of her case. The review didn't find evidence of police or prosecutor wrongdoing, but they found 7 major police blunders and awarded Laurie a new trial. She voluntarily returned to the United States on April 22, 1992. The DA offered her a deal because there were holes in the case and most of the evidence was circumstantial. Even though she was entitled to a new trial, she took the guaranteed path to freedom and pled no contest to second-degree murder. On December 8, 1992, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison, received credit for the 10 years already served, and was released from police custody just hours after the hearing. After her release, Laurie wrote a book about her experience called Woman on Trial. It detailed what happened during her time in the police academy with the corruption and sexist rhetoric that she said existed within the Milwaukee Police Department, through her arrest, conviction for murder, and escape from prison. Several movies were also made. The most popular one was called Woman on Trial, the Lawrencia Bembenek story, which starred Tatum O'Neal as Laurie Bembenek. Even though Laurie had her freedom, her life continued on a downward trajectory. She had legal and financial problems, which prompted her to file for bankruptcy. She was arrested on marijuana possession charges. Laurie had significant health problems, including alcoholism and hepatitis C, which had been a long-standing diagnosis, as she was infected from her mother during pregnancy. Laurie had difficulties coping with the publicity and exposure she received in Wisconsin, so she moved west and started over. Laurie made friends and found a job where she helped impoverished women get off the streets, who often had children to care for or had the challenges of having a criminal record. Laurie found love again when she met and married a United States Forest Service ranger named Marty Carson. She was upfront about her past with Marty. One of their first dates, she brought over the movie about her life story and asked him if he had any questions. She genuinely tried to fill her life with things that made her happy. Laurie started painting and ended up placing her paintings at a local art gallery. Suspiciously, the gallery burned down and Laurie's paintings were destroyed in the fire. Laurie's lawyer was working on her behalf to overturn her conviction. A DNA test was ordered, but she had to come up with $20,000 to $30,000. In exchange for money to pay for the DNA testing, Laurie agreed to be interviewed on the Dr. Phil show, with the premise being that they would present the DNA results to her on air. The day before the taping, she was held in an apartment by producers with the show. She said she got frustrated with being confined, had a panic attack, jumped out of a second-story window, and broke her leg. The injury was so significant that her leg was amputated. Laurie had spent 7 months in solitary confinement while in prison, and being kept in that apartment for the Dr. Phil show triggered her PTSD. She received an undisclosed settlement from the Dr. Phil show. In 2003, Laurie's lawyer, Mary Warrer, filed a legal petition that included results of the testing that showed Laurie's DNA was not found at the scene of Christine Schultz's murder. There was also DNA evidence that Christine had sexual relations with a man prior to her death. This prompted the judge to ask the prosecutor for the test bullet that was fired from Fred's off-duty weapon. The prosecution claimed that the bullet had been destroyed in a fire back in 1986, which was 6 years prior to Laurie taking the plea deal. Had she known this, she would have taken her case to trial and likely won. In 2006, Laurie's lawyer ordered a new ballistics test, which determined that the bullet fired from Fred's off-duty service weapon did not match the bullet that killed Christine Schultz. The state appeals court would not hear her case because Laurie had given up her appeals rights when she took the plea deal in 1992. In April 2008, Laurie filed an appeal to overturn her no-contest plea with the United States Supreme Court. She was steadfast in proclaiming her innocence in Christine's murder, and her attorney provided all the evidence that wasn't heard in Laurie's original trial, including the DNA crime scene evidence, the sexual assault evidence, the ballistics test that proved the gun she had access to did not kill Christine, and direct testimony from Fred and Christine's boys that the intruder was a heavy-set masked man. Laurie's appeal was denied in June of that year. Laurie's lawyer, Mary Warrer, put in years of work on her behalf, but would never be allowed to prove Laurie's innocence in a court of law. Ira Robbins had been an integral part of Laurie Bembenek's legal team. He was an ex-Milwaukee area cop turned private investigator. In 1982, he won a lawsuit against the police department after they bullied him into quitting because he was Jewish. He intimately understood and witnessed the systemic problems within the Milwaukee Police Department and believed that Laurie Bembenek was innocent. He had been instrumental in documenting the lost evidence and the mischaracterized ballistics reports, which led to Laurie's original conviction. He worked tirelessly on her behalf since the 1980s and unfortunately passed away in 2019. In October 2010, news reporter Mike Jacobs with WTMJ-TV was granted an exclusive interview with Laurie. She had not allowed the media to interview her or be in her home until then. In the interview, Jacobs asked her if she murdered Christine, and Laurie flat out told him no. She continued to say that she was framed by the Milwaukee Police Department. She believes that Fred paid a convicted felon to commit the murder. She maintained her innocence until her death from liver failure on November 20, 2010. In his final report, Jacobs said that Laurie had everything and ended up with nothing. From her autobiography, Woman on Trial, this excerpt summarizes the story of Laurie's emotional journey of her difficult life. Well, you know me a little better. As I said at the beginning, I'm no Joan of Arc, no cringing virgin, no saint. I was something of a wild child, and I made lots of mistakes. I'm also mouthy and independent, and I think I've become quite strong. But I'm also just an ordinary person, like your sister or your daughter. I'm just a person who would like her life back. Is that so much to ask? I've learned so many things I wish I'd never had to learn. I learned about the system of justice. I learned that it protects its own, cannot bring itself to admit its mistakes, that many of its practitioners seem more concerned with process than justice. So much heartbreak, so much despair, so unnecessary, so many lives broken on the wheel of accrued ambition and cover-up on the rack of process. I will be out soon, I hope, but I will never recapture any sense that the system is benign. It has taken 10 years of my life, and every day I listen to its partisans, demanding to take more, more, more. Going on is possible. Survival is possible. Even happiness is possible, I hope. But I'm not all that sure about forgiveness. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Boy, this story just breaks your heart. So after Laurie died, Dominic wrote a book called You Never Have to Remember the Truth, the Nick Guglielmo story. I didn't read it, but based on reviews, it seems he was pretty salty over his relationship with Laurie after the fact. And he didn't have kind things to say about her even after her death. I'll have a link to that on the website, along with private investigator Ira Robbins' blog, which details all the facts uncovered in his years of investigating this case. He even posted photos from the parties where the Milwaukee cops were acting lewd and getting naked in public, so that's pretty interesting. Please visit BeyondContentPodcast.com for links to the sources used in this episode. This episode was researched by Becca Klein. Scriptwriting, editing, and all audio production were performed by me. If you like the show, please leave me a favorable review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, everyone.
And take away this pain that I've been holding on to, yeah. 'Cause I want to be like the birds all singing in the trees. Oh Lord, I want to be free. So take away this fear. Take away this doubt and let me know that you're here and you're not going anywhere. 'Cause I want to be like the fish all swimming in the sea. Oh Lord, I want to be free. Like the children play in the breeze. Oh Lord, I want to be free. Oh my Lord, come and stay.